Jake Paul vs Mike Perry was embarrassing to watch. I could excuse Jake for picking fights with former MMA stars in the beginning of his boxing career. They had name value, they were experienced in the combat sports arena, and with Jake only boxing for 1 or 2 years at that point, it made sense for him to fight the likes of Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva. That being said, 2024 Jake Paul is a different beast from 2021 Jake Paul. For him to have 6 years of boxing training under his belt, plus a bout with Tommy Fury, now fighting against Mike Perry, in this stage of his career, is cringe. Yes, Mike Perry is tough, but that doesn't mean fucking anything in the sport of boxing if you don't have any real boxing ability. I hate how people toss that attribute around to try and excuse this fight. Mike Perry is a bad motherfucker, man, people like to say. Yes, in bare knuckle. Boxing is a totally different sport where Jake Paul has way more experience, whether he started as a YouTuber or not. Jake Paul looked good in the fight because of course he did. Who actually thought Mike Perry stood a chance? He's a fucking brawler with no real boxing IQ. He also fights like 2 weight classes below Jake, so that's just another unfair aspect of this fight. Again, Jake having the size advantage made sense earlier in his career because he was fairly inexperienced compared to the likes of Anderson Silva, but the gap between him and MMA fighters is non-existent now. Also, between 20 and 2023, Jake was taking on better and better challenges each time he fought. There was clear progression in his opponents, culminating in Jake Paul fighting a comparable pro boxer in Tommy Fury. As of 2024 though, Jake Paul has not continued this path, and went back to fighting lesser opponents. Nate Diaz, who has never held a UFC belt, 2 tomato cans that box part-time and are way smaller than Jake, and of course Mike Perry, who's had a decent stint in bare knuckle, but that's it. Jake Paul has regressed, and his career is misguided at this point. The fact that this was a DAZN pay-per-view is embarrassing, and these analysts telling you that the fight will be close at all in order to try to sell this card should be embarrassed as well. Jake Paul should be fighting decent pro boxers now, specifically tough journeymen around his size. He shouldn't be fighting world beaters in his weight class obviously, that wouldn't make sense at all, but tough guys who have trained in the sport of boxing for most of their life. Not tough guys from other combat sports, it just doesn't translate. I'm over the MMA vs Jake Paul narrative, and although Mike Perry got a massive payday I assume, this fight was a disaster and was never fair. I didn't make a preview for this fight because 1, I had other shit going on, and 2, it was obvious who the winner was going to be. I mean, look at the fucking size of Jake Paul compared to Mike Perry. Jake looks like a borderline heavyweight. He's been in the sport for long enough. Give him an actual boxer who can win against him. Not tomato cans, but solid competitive journeymen. Think of Anees Taj, a guy that English cruiserweight champion Vidal Riley recently fought. As for the fight itself, Jake outboxed him and made Mike look terrible in there. He knocked him down several times, and yeah, it was hard to watch. That's not to say that Jake Paul had a terrific performance tonight. He didn't. Yeah, he threw some hard shots and boxed okay on the outside, but he also gassed in the 3rd round, and that's probably due to his weight gain. Jake Paul also does not like to get hit, and if he fights someone who knows how to back him up and actually make the fight rough, that could be his undoing. The ref called the fight off in round 6, and yeah, I don't have too much to say. It was a pretty awful fight to watch, and Jake didn't look like he improved enough for me to do a full analysis on. DAZN, MVP, and the influencer boxing scene in general. Stop peddling these terrible matchups. We've seen time and time again that MMA and boxing are different sports, and influencers like KSI and Jake Paul have devoted enough time to the sport for them to beat these MMA guys. We don't need to see any more of these fights. It's getting old. Oh, but wait, this guy is so tough and has a granite chin. Give me a fucking break. Jake Paul should fight a boxer who can crack, in his weight class and age bracket. Jake Paul is good for the sport if he continues to up the levels. It's obvious that he'll be involved in the sport for quite a while. He does love boxing, but this gimmick of fighting MMA guys has got to end.